Hello everyone, this is Al Fadi, and I'd like to welcome you back to this series under the Political Islam section of our teachings. This one is part of the Understanding Islam video series, and if you've been watching the previous few episodes, you would have noticed, of course, that I have with me here in studio a dear friend and a brother. His name is Dr. Bill Warner. And he and I have been really interacting with each other for the sake of simplifying such complex topic for many of you. And hopefully you have found it and you will continue to find this particular video series to be helpful to you and also to share it with others who have really a desire to know more about Islam, but maybe they don't know where to turn to find such a simplified way. And let's face it, it depends who you ask sometimes, and it depends what's the motive behind the answers you're getting as well. You cannot expect a Muslim who is genuinely basically protecting his own teaching to come out and do any critical assessment for you. And the latter is also part is true when you ask someone who either doesn't understand Islam or maybe have their own way of explaining it because of political correctness as well. So we need to be careful, of course, which sources to go to. And as a result of this, we're hoping that the many things that we'll mention to you today here in the video and also some of the references and websites, you'll find them to be extremely practical for your understanding. Bill, welcome back, of course. Today, I think we are going to talk about something that you coined, and at least that's the only place I came across with such a terminology called the trilogy.
Yes.
And I know what it is, but I want you to explain it to our audience. What did you mean by the trilogy?
Well, of course, the trilogy means three works, but here's the reason we need to talk about the three books, I'm going to call them that, or text. When you read the Quran, once again, if you know Islam, you realize something is missing. There are none of the 5 pillars included in the Quran on exactly how to practice them. For instance, it mentions prayer, but exactly how do you pray? So it turns out that we have to turn to something called the Hadith, which are the traditions of Muhammad. Now, I'm going to refer to just one particular scholar named Bukhari, and there are about 7,000 of these Hadith. So this is a daunting task. I've never met many people who've read all 7,000 of the Hadith of Bukhari, which I have done. I don't recommend it. But again, you realize that the Hadith contains all the nitty-gritty of Islam. How do you pray? Well, here's exactly how you pray. I mean precisely how you pray. How do you have sex? How do you do everything you want to think of in Islam that you might do as a Muslim is found in the Hadith. And they're sorted out to some degree. So what I did was I took the Hadith and said, I'm only interested in what affects me, the non-Muslim. Well, it turns out 21% of the Hadith are about me and any other non-Muslim. So you then take and you can collect these and you realize, well, there's a lot of them on women. There's all the little nitty-gritty details are there. I don't care about how to pray, but I do care about things that are, well, let's just take an interesting fact. What is the shortest Hadith in Bukhari? War is deceit. 3 words. Well, immediately that's like, that's an interesting thing to be talking about in a religious text.
Right, exactly.
So, but anyway, I find Bukhari very interesting to read because it has all these little details, which when you read Bukhari at first you may go, well, that's interesting. Then really, later when you study Sharia law, it's like, oh, wait a minute. That's the foundation for this law.
Correct.
So, Bukhari.
So you have Quran, you have Hadith, and the last part of the trilogy?
The CIRA, the life of Muhammad. Now, let's point out something here. If we look at how big, most people think that Islam is based on the Quran, right?
Correct.
Well, only 14% of the trilogy, if you take Bukhari, the life of Muhammad, and the Quran, only 14% of it is about Allah.
That's right. And here is, by the way, a chart for people to follow along, of course.
So we have Quran is 14%, the Sirah is 26% of the total text, the Hadith are 60%. So I like to say Islam is 14% Allah and 86% Muhammad.
That's true, because the Hadith is his sayings.
Yes.
The Sirah is his own life.
Right.
Therefore, you add them up together, like you said, it's 86% of the life of a Muslim.
Right. So this is very interesting within itself, because if you think that the Quran is the basis of it, it's like, no. Muhammad is far more important to Islam than the Quran is. which I think is a very interesting fact.
Right. And I want to add, so you mentioned earlier, you read hadith and about how to pray and things like that. There is a group called the submitters, or the Quran-only group. And the reason for that, Bill, as you probably have, interacted maybe with this before, is that they reject some of the hadith because they feel like, man, it's embarrassing. I can't believe that the Prophet would have said something like that.
Right.
I mean, and they also acknowledge that the hadith itself was collected by Bukhari almost 240 years after the time of Muhammad. So in their mind, there has to be some corruption. And I can tell you why they think this way, because Bukhari himself collected 660,000 at least, and he narrowed it down to 7,000. And the 7,000 contains some repetitions as well.
Yes.
So they say, well, wait a minute. I mean, maybe he missed this. Maybe he missed that. So they rejected. The problem is this. How do you know how to pray from the Quran? You wouldn't know.
You don't know.
You have to go to the hadith to understand how to pray. Mm-hmm. So that's just a simple example.
And what do you do about the 89 Quran verses which say you're supposed to imitate Muhammad?
That's right. Exactly.
Because you can't imitate Muhammad from what's in the Quran, that's for sure.
Exactly. So this is why it's important. And of course, the trilogy, as Bill mentioned, is like the three works, or the three sources, the three primary sources, if you wish, of how to be let's use this word, how to be a true good Muslim. If you want to be a true good Muslim, you need, yes, to know what Allah says, but guess what Allah told you? Obey the Prophet. So you have to go back now to the Prophet, and the Prophet says certain things, that's the hadith. And the Prophet lived a certain life. That's the model, the practical model. Anything else you want to add to in terms of the trilogy itself from your own studies?
We have put our arms around the subject. That is, if it is not in the Quran, the Sirah, the Hadith, it is not Islam. And if it is in Quran, Sirah, Hadith, it is Islam. This is very important because people think that Islam is like the Amazon rainforest, that it's so complicated and no one can ever understand it all. You can hold it in your two hands. These three books are what Islam is. Let me repeat it. If it's in there, it's Islam. If it's not in there, it's not Islam. That's how important they are.
That's right. And obviously, Sharia law, as we know it, and there is a number of schools, by the way, under the Sunni branch of Sharia, and then number of schools under the Shia branch of School of Islam. Nevertheless, guess where they go to come up with their own rulings? The trilogy.
That's all they can go to. That's it.
Exactly.
So this means, by the way, if you're talking with someone who is a Muslim and they say such and such is not Islam, and you go, wait a minute, I've read that in the Hadith or the Quran, so it is Islam. I don't care who you are. So this is something important. That is, Islam is a knowable subject. Just like you can study accounting, you can study Islam, and you can actually understand it. I want to make that very clear.
Absolutely. And this is why, I honestly commend people who want to be, politically correct with a Muslim friend or a neighbor. I also commend people who say, well, Islam has to be peaceful because my classmate is a peaceful person, or my neighbor is a wonderful guy. We're not saying they're bad people, by the way. We're talking about the source of their identity. Put it this way. As a follower of Jesus, if you see Christians knocking down, people's houses and raping their wives and things like that, you are going to say Christians do this, and I'm going to have to step in and say, no. Jesus never taught this. That's pretty much what I'm going to tell you. In other words, the model for my faith never modeled something like this. And you're outraged because a Christian did this. How would you feel then when I tell you that the leader of Islam and the founder of Islam actually condoned such actions that I just mentioned to you? Why is that Islamophobia? And outside of that, it is not. Bill, you travel a lot. How do you see the influence of Islam in Europe, for instance?
Well, it is astounding. There are large portions of many European cities now in which it's perhaps not safe to go, or at least you don't feel comfortable. And I've been in some of these areas. Europe is desperately trying to work out how can we live with these people. But Europe is also desperate not to know what Islam really is, because they want to have the kind of Muslim that they can imagine. But instead, they get just Muslims who contain all varieties. Remember Mecca, Medina? So there are some Muslims there who are nice people. Then there are other Medina, which is jihad. And this is concerning people because, and by the way, much of this you don't find in the media. But let me give you an example of what's happened with immigration. I know a man who always goes to Germany for the Oktoberfest, and he's stayed at a family hotel. He's done this for 30 years. Oddly enough, he doesn't even drink beer.
He goes to the Oktoberfest and doesn't drink beer.
Doesn't drink beer.
That's un-German of him.
How un-German. But he called my friend up and he says, do not come this year. That is, he actually told this man who had been staying with him for decades, do not come. You are not safe. My wife was attacked last night.
Wow.
But this is not found in the newspaper. So what we see here is that the media in Europe is dedicated to whitewashing Islam. And as a matter of fact, you can get into trouble. Well, here's an example, the trouble I got into. On German Facebook, we got thrown off because we published two graphs. One was the increase in crime, and the other was the increase in migration. Well, that was hate speech, so we got thrown off of that. We got thrown off of Twitter. I forget what we did there, but it was always talking about immigration. So what has happened is that in Europe, it's gotten to the point where you can't talk about immigration because if you don't like what's happening, then you are an Islamophobe. By the way, I'm an official Islamophobe.
I mean, I hear you, Bill. I mean, I the other day I made a Facebook kind of like a comment. I said, why is it that only Islam that comes up with a terminology like this, or at least those who are sympathetic to it? It's the only religion that if you speak against it, by the way, you're called an Islamophobe.
Right.
Doesn't this indicate the domination of Islam because it's forcing
Precisely.
you everywhere now not to mess with us,
Right.
don't say anything about us? If you talk about Christianity anywhere in the world, are they going to allow? Is Twitter going to remove your
No.
tweet? Are they going to really get bad? Get on your case because you said something bad about Jesus, for instance?
Not at all.
Why not?
Because they're not afraid of the Christian, but they are afraid of the Muslim. And they're also afraid of political correctness has created this sort of weird police state in which there's nobody really at the head of it. Let me give you an example. When I was teaching at TSU, a university, Win Mint was a Burmese man, and I said to him, I says, Win, I said, I've been racist in talking about you. He says, what do you mean, Bill? I said, well, I've called you an Oriental. He said, and? I said, well, that's now been declared to be a racist term. He says, who makes these decisions? I said, you're not offended? He says, no.
Yeah.
So the importance is who makes these decisions?
Exactly.
There doesn't seem to be, and yet they get enforced, let me assure you.
Absolutely. And, it's the only religion, by the way, that talks about something called Sharia law compliance financial system.
Yes.
Do we have a Christian law compliance financial system somewhere?
I don't think we do.
I mean, 10% across the board, I'm telling you. If we find it. But this is really the fascinating part for me. I mean, I tell people, you think Sharia law will take over as if it hasn't done so. It did already.
Yes. We're going to talk about Sharia law later in more detail. But Sharia is not like a Western law. As a matter of fact, this is an interesting point. Everything in Islam is kind of like Western civilization, but when you look at it real close, it's not like it at all. And so this is just one of those examples of where you would think it would be the same, but it turns out to be very different.
Very good. I think maybe we should wrap up this particular episode, but when we come back, we'll continue to talk about these sources, and I'd like to also discuss like different point of view about Islam. And what I mean by that is, who do you ask about Islam and what answer you may perceive from them, and does that point of view or response coincide with the trilogy, if you wish? Mm-hmm. So these are very important things, and I think we're coming to really a close to wrap up this particular introductory series. We called it Understanding Islam. After that, I think we're going to dedicate a big portion of our videos to specific topics.
Yes.
I think we agreed we're going to talk about the status of women in Islam. We are going to talk about slavery. And then if time allows, we may talk about the Sharia. And there is also talking about the treatment of people of other faith as well. Now, the good news is we're not going anywhere. This is the beginning of this particular Political Islam series, and I know where Bill is, and we'll continue to do this. So the amount of videos we'll be doing just in the next few days will be released probably over the course of months. So technically speaking, people will not be deprived from knowing anything about this topic. So thank you again, Bill, and thank you everyone for watching. And please send us your comments, send your questions, and interact with us, and we'll make sure that Bill, either directly or indirectly, also gets those particular questions as well. Thank you, and God bless. Thank you for watching. Please like our video, and we encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, CIRA International. And be sure also to click the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we upload new videos into the channel. And finally, I like to prayerfully encourage you to become a patron through Patreon. Your giving is much needed and will enable us to produce more and more of videos like this.